Okay, so next we talk about presumptions. So what is a presumption? Traditionally, courts have approached intention on the basis of this idea of two presumptions. So presumptions are really starting points. They start from the basis that agreements that are made in a commercial context are presumed to be made with an intention to create a legal relationship, and agreements made in other contexts are not presumed to be made with an intention to create a legal relation. It was even said in some cases that there was a presumption against an intention to create legal relations in the case of certain transactions between family members, particularly husband and wife. The presumptions that the courts made are a kind of shorthand. They allow the courts to identify who it was who had the onus of proving intention. In the case of a commercial transaction, the courts will assume that the parties intended a contract to be binding, and if a party wants to rebut that presumption, they need to bring evidence to that effect. Similarly, they might presume that there is no such intention in a non-commercial transaction, and accordingly, if a party wants to identify the existence of a contract, it will be up to them to demonstrate to the court that such intention was part of the arrangement. Now, I've used that terminology quite precisely. The court starting point, its shortcut, for want of another word, is a presumption. But all presumptions are rebuttable. So that means the court will hear evidence to the contrary to rebut the presumption. And the onus of proof, the responsibility for providing evidence to support the rebuttal, is on the party who wishes to make the rebuttal, so who wishes to rebut the presumption. So there has been, since the early 2000s, a much greater doubt about the utility of presumptions. So let's have a think about the Ermogenous case, because I think this was really the turning point for the law, and it illustrates the point really well. So basically, Ermogenous, I like to think of him as the bishop actually, he was the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox community of South Australia. And part of the Greek Orthodox community. And for 23 years, he served, I assume, in that position, but perhaps in more junior positions first. I don't know how you become an archbishop. And ultimately, he resigned. And when he resigned, well, they didn't pay out any long service leave or holiday pay or anything like that. And so, obviously, the relationship was not good. They didn't reach an agreement, and he sued them for unpaid annual leave and those long service leave entitlements. So the community, the Greek Orthodox community of South Australia, claimed that there was no contract of employment. He had no contractual right to any entitlements. And ultimately, the question, and it went all the way to the High Court, was whether or not there was an intention that the relationship between the Archbishop and the community was supposed to be a legal relationship. So ultimately, in deciding that there was no ground to infer the absence of an intention to create legal relationships, the High Court placed a doubt on the utility or the value of the presumptions at all. It's not exactly clear, as your textbook will note, whether their honours meant to cast doubt on the utility of the presumptions in the context of the engagement of a minister of religion or in the broader context of the intention to create legal relationships at all. But the tenor of the judgment suggests the latter, and their honours express concern that a presumption that a legal relationship isn't intended in a particular context could have the effect of, and their words were, ossifying the law. And so at best, the value of the presumption is really to identify who has the onus of proof. In Ermogenous, the court said, not only is there an obvious difficulty in formulating rules intended to prescribe the kind of cases in which intention to create contractual relations should or should not be found to exist, it would be wrong to do so. If you go into one of the tools to look at the citations of Ermogenous, particularly if you look in Jade, where you can go to the relevant paragraph, you'll see that this is a really often cited provision. So it's well and truly entrenched now in the law that it's a very low standard for demonstrating the existence of an intention to create a legal relationship. So, how do we actually find whether there's an intention to create contractual relations or not? Ermogenous suggests the following. We look at the subject matter of the agreement. What was the agreement or the arrangement about? Was it of a commercial or a nature or something that otherwise would be expected to be contractually binding? In that particular case, the subject matter was the employment of the Archbishop, what his roles and responsibilities were, what his hours were, what his duties to the community were. They of themselves suggested an intention. We look at the status of the parties. In this case, he clearly reported to the board or the constituting entity of the committee. They were able to discipline him. They were able to tell him what to do and what he wasn't allowed to do. Sure, he had some roles and responsibilities and some duties to report to them, but the relationship between the parties and the status of the parties demonstrated an employment relationship. We also look at the parties' relationship with each other. It appears towards the end of that relationship there was some breakdown, but we also look at who reported to who, how those things fell together, and then ultimately other objective and surrounding circumstances. Are these reminiscent of anything? Yes, they are. We talked about very similar types of things that the court would look at in the decision about Shahid and the Royal College of Dermatologists. So, subsequent to Ermogenous, we have this idea that the importance of presumption ultimately relates to the onus of proof. So, in a commercial context, there might be a presumption in favour of the existence of an intention to create a legal relationship, and in a social domestic family arrangement, there is no such presumption. However, this goes ultimately to onus of proof. In commercial transactions, this means that the onus is on the party seeking to establish no intention. Alternatively, in a social relationship, this means that the onus is on the party that's seeking to establish that the intention exists. So how do you determine the existence of intention? What the parties intended will often be clear from the nature of and the circumstances surrounding their agreement. In Ermogenous, it was an employment agreement. So the intention of the parties was clearer that it should be, on an objective basis, a commercial relationship and a legally binding one. Where it isn't so clear, then the courts will look objectively. And the onus of proving legal intention rests with the party alleging that a contract exists.